Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Derek Gaunt. Derek is commanded and trained police department hostage negotiation teams. He's an expert trainer and coach. Derek's worked across the U.S. and around the world. He's an author of Ego, Authority, Failure, written for leaders. Derek is a coach with the Black Swan Group, the team behind the scenes of the best-selling book, Never Split the Difference, where he presents seminars, in-the-house training programs in a variety of environments. His presentations are engaging and filled with useful techniques and for understanding human behavior and navigating difficult conversations. Today, we're going to talk about how those useful conversations and navigating human behavior comes into play when you're talking about buying companies or working with business owners in any sense. Thank you for being on the show. So I always like to start the show, kind of give people a little bit of history or the origin story. I kind of joke and say, man, you were born and then now you're on my show. Could you fill out the gap in between? What did you do in life that had you end up on a mergers and acquisitions podcast?
Wow. The skills that we espouse at the Black Swan Group were born out of hostage negotiations, and that's where I cut my adult teeth. I spent most of my 29-year career as a part of hostage negotiations team. So walking you through it, I started my career in '88, became a negotiator in '97, team leader in 2001, team commander in 2004, and that's the position I held up until the time that I left. And in that time, I met Chris Voss right around 2000, 2001, when he transferred from the New York field office to the FBI Academy down at Quantico, which is where their crisis negotiations unit is. And that was 35 miles south of the city where I worked. He was heavy into the discipline. I was heavy into the discipline. We had mutual acquaintances. They introduced us, and the rest, as they say, is history. So I started with him in about 2010 on a part-time basis, came on full-time in 2017. And being with the Black Swan Group, as you alluded to, has allowed me the opportunity to travel the globe preaching the gospel of the Black Swan method. So that's how I wound up on How to Exit. In large part is you getting out of your own way. Stop worrying about what your goal and objective is. Your goal and objective is what it is right now. But based on the dialogue, that goal and objective could change. Don't be so focused in on where you want to end up that you wouldn't take something better if it came along. And believe me, if you're listening, and I'm talking about listening on the deepest level, I'm not talking about surface level listening. That's where most of us do our dancing. We're listening intermittently, where we're just listening long enough to get the gist of what the other side is saying before we refocus on our own internal monologue. Or we're doing what is termed rebuttal listening, where I'm going to listen to you long enough till I hear something I can argue with, and I'm going to wait for you to shut up so I can jump into the conversation to show you how brilliant I am. And that's where most of us do our dancing. Anytime you engage in a conversation where I want or I need is in your head, or I want or I need is in the head of your counterpart, there are going to be negative emotions attached with that. A person that's built their company from nothing, that gets approached by a prospective buyer, yeah, there's a lot of identity issues there. And we ignore those at our own peril because the other side is screaming there are identity issues, and we don't want to touch it because we're afraid of getting it wrong. We're afraid of offending. We're afraid if you point a light at it, it'll spark a thought in their mind and they'll pull out of the conversation and or transaction. And so we ignore it. And negative emotions and dynamics, unexpressed, never go away. So just because you ignore it doesn't mean it's not there anymore. Just because you ignore it doesn't mean it's not bouncing around in their head. And at the end of the day, your brain works up to 31% better when you are in a positive state. Think about this for a second, Ron. If you've made up your mind where you want to end up at the end of any negotiation or difficult conversation, and you're married to that to the point where you're just being rigid, you're doing so knowingly and intentionally based on incomplete information. How crazy is that?
It's insane, but we do it. I mean, on a day-to-day basis as human natural behavior, we live our lives doing that to other people.
Do not ignore what your subconscious is telling you about the circumstances, about the conversation, about the environment. Your subconscious, your intuition has kept us alive for thousands of years. Pay attention to it. It's never going to let you down. Your subconscious brain processes 20 million bits of information, I'm sorry, bytes of information per second. Your conscious brain only processes 40. That's you picking up data from the other side that you are unaware of. And so that's why you hear us use phrases like deferring to the other side, subordinating yourself to the other side, putting your goals and objectives on the back seat until such time in the conversation when it's time for you to share information with them. And what that does is that's the first steps towards tactical empathy. One of the strongest components or characteristics of tactical empathy is that it encourages reciprocity. I'm going to do it first because I'm going to call it in when it's time for me to make my ask or draw my line in the sand or present my case in chief. Think about that for a second. You're using yes to tie people down. How do you think that makes the other side feel when their autonomy is encroached to the point where you are actually tying them down? And so any yes oriented question, any question that you could ask where you're driving for a yes, 2 millimeter shift, you can make it into a no oriented question. And it boggles my mind how many people will agree to something when you allow them to say no that they otherwise wouldn't agree to if you were pushing them for a yes.
I've got this like image of very short, brief conversations that you have. Like you call them and you're on the phone for 45 seconds to a minute and a half. And then then you get off the phone, you have a chance to analyze it and stuff. What is it like in real life? I mean, did you actually have longer, deeper conversations with these individuals, or how does it, or is it?
Well, I'm going to give you the standard hostage negotiation answer. It depends.
I do. That's funny. When I ask the question, like, he's going to tell me it depends.
and so what does it depend on? If they're actually holding somebody else against their will, I'm going to limit the amount of time that they're off of the phone with me. And so I'm going to keep that conversation going longer than maybe I would lone barricade. Guys in a house threatening to kill him. He's gonna burn the house down, and he's already fired off a weapon. All right. Well, he's by himself. That incident, the dynamics are different. It's got time to cook a little bit, and so we will break contact with a lone barricade often. Have him go to the bathroom, have him get himself something to eat, have him calm down, whatever the case may be. And so it really depends on who we're dealing with and what the other dynamics that are at play. But it's not, when they're holding someone against their will, we're not going to break conversation as frequently as we otherwise would.